You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 9th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme.
I cannot imagine we will arrive to this moment. Do you know what happened now? The dictator is gone.
Syrians celebrate the fall of the Assad regime as the wider Middle East looks on, wondering whether this is a time for optimism or heralds more volatility. We'll have the latest on the broader regional reaction from Iran to Lebanon to Turkey. From there we head to Ukraine, where Germany's opposition leader Friedrich Merz has arrived for a surprise visit at a time where his vocal support for Kyiv could be costing him support in federal elections back home. We'll also get a roundup of theatre news ahead of the holidays, and finally,
it's important also that the young people who live here in Kautokeino have the chance to take their education, first education here in their local home place.
Petri Bertsoff of Monocle is in northern Norway visiting a new school of the region's indigenous Sámi population. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. This is The Briefing, and we will start in Syria, where the shock fall of the Assad regime in a matter of days has transformed the Middle East and its power balances. Iran and Russia are weaker, Turkey emerges stronger, and everyone else is waiting to see just who will step into the void, what relations with any potential new government might look like, and whether they raise or lower the tensions in the wider region. Well, for the latest on Syria, I'm joined by Renad Mansour, Research Fellow in the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, and Leila Molana Allen, Monocle's Middle East Correspondent. Leila, let me start with you. When you look back on this weekend, the surprising pace of all of this, just your reactions. I mean, did this go in some ways about as well as could be expected?
Well, for the rebels, certainly. This has been an absolutely shock sweep for sort of anyone that wasn't watching. This offensive was planned in October. There was some negotiation via Turkey that meant it was held back. But the reality is they took their moment. I mean, this is a 13-year initially revolution and then civil war. And the amount of ground that, President Assad held onto through a brutal dictatorship for those 13 years was taken in 12 days. Now, that's obviously a meeting of several different factors, one of which is the huge weakening of Russia in Ukraine. Russia did help a little bit at the beginning of this sweep in Idlib with horrible airstrikes in both Idlib and Aleppo, but the reality is they weren't willing to send more forces and eventually pulled out, although they do still have their bases on the coast at the moment. Whether they keep them is a question. And then, of course, we've seen Hezbollah and their funders Iran significantly weakened in the war in Lebanon, Israel's war in Lebanon in the last couple of months. So both those major benefactors and, of course, those ground troops from Hezbollah and the IRGC in Syria not willing or able to help anymore. And we saw really Syrian soldiers, many of whom are unwilling conscripts, some who've been forcibly conscripted, terribly paid, even after their salaries were increased last week, essentially laying down their weapons. People were driving past checkpoints, finding empty tanks. So that's one of the reasons why they were able to sweep through so fast. And an absolutely historic week, a historic weekend. The utter joy for the hundreds of thousands of Syrians who lost family members, many of whom don't know whether they may still be alive in these many secret prisons they're now finding underground. But really a historic weekend and much hope, of course, much fear as well about what the future might be. It's such a chaotic time and with so many different groups now running different parts of the country, but there is reason to be hopeful.
Renad, to bring you in on that, I mean, your reaction to how this weekend has unfolded so far, and also particularly perhaps how we imagine this is being covered in Iran, a country that, of course, was a supporter of the Assad regime and was probably also caught on the back foot by the pace of all this.
Yes, I mean, certainly this is a historic moment for Syrians after several decades of living under a brutal dictatorship. And, those around the region, especially after 2011, but also in Iraq in 2003, many people have gone through this experience, know the kind of the rejoice of being just having that day or two to be able to say, we no longer live under this type of tyranny. Although, of course, the transition and things moving forward need to start now so as not to repeat some of those mistakes. From Iran, of course, the narrative right now is that the axis of resistance, which is the network of armed groups linked to Iran, has been weakened. Assad was part of this axis of resistance, so it's been degraded, and we've seen the same with other Iranian allies like Hezbollah in Lebanon. The way that the Iranians are covering this and looking at this was, Assad just became too much of a liability for this axis, an army that's unwilling to fight, a leader that's unwilling to make deals, and he was pushed, he was urged to make deals with Turkey and others, and was becoming too stubborn and was becoming a liability. So there's only so much that, from the Iranian perspective, there's only so much that Iran could have done that, they can't just keep propping up and coming to the defense of this type of regime. And it was too late. And it happened so quickly that Iran, I think, also was scrambling. So, many people are saying this is sort of wither Iran, and I think it's a bit too quick to be saying that. But certainly, Iran is rethinking its sort of defense doctrine, rethinking its how it sort of wants to pursue national security, particularly with the incoming Trump administration and upcoming antagonisms. And this was not a battle worth fighting.
And Leila, what's the view in your mind from Lebanon on this? A country that, of course, took in many refugees from Syria and also was involved because Hezbollah was involved in Syria. Is this bad for Hezbollah and good for Lebanon as a whole?
For Lebanon, there is sheer joy across the majority of Lebanon. Lebanon and Syria are incredibly close countries. The people are incredibly close. This connection between Lebanon, Syria, and Palestinians and the Palestinian territories, it's difficult to kind of explain if you haven't spent time in the region how interwoven their lives and histories and cultures are. They care incredibly deeply about each other. Of course, many of the families are mixed, but also their political struggles have been so intertwined. Syria for many years was a very malign influence, this dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad and his father. There's an incredibly powerful picture yesterday of Roni Shatta and the daughter of Bashir Gemayel, both of whose fathers were assassinated under the orders of the Assads, holding hands in Beirut, saying that time is done, fireworks across Beirut, celebrating. And of course, most importantly, for the more than 1 million Syrian refugees living in Lebanon, they can go home. There has been so much hatred of these refugees around the world, and sadly, increasingly in Lebanon, because of the struggles Lebanon's faced over the last few years, financially, and feeling that, the Syrian refugees are an extra burden. No one wants to be a refugee. And from the moment Damascus fell, within hours, people were streaming towards the border trying to get home. Everyone wants to go home. This is a dream that these people have dreamed on. And for many people like me who've covered this entire revolution and then civil war, the level of pain, the failure of the international community, the abandonment of these millions of people to sheer hell, whether that's inside Syria or outside, and to see in such a short period of time, really it gives me goosebumps. It's to really stress to you, people who have not seen their family members in years, many of whom don't know if they're alive, running across open borders, checkpoints are gone, their identities don't matter anymore, holding each other, sobbing, people holding their aged parents who thought they died in prison cells. This is absolutely monumental. And as both Renad and I are saying, that there's a lot to be concerned about in terms of how this transition plays out, and great hopes that it can be done so peacefully and with a Syria for all Syrians, this incredibly diverse country. And of course, we know that this rebel movement is led by an Islamist faction, but they have been making a lot of noises the last few years about wanting to be more moderate. They're reaching out to minority communities who are afraid about the future. So everyone right now really just praying that this is an end to the suffering of so many people for half a century, and the opening of a difficult struggle for a Syria for all Syrians, but a dream that so many people have fought and died for.
Renad, when you hear Leila talk there about this feeling, the dream that this is a hopeful moment for so many coming back, I did want to ask you particularly about Iraq, because it is not only one of your specialties, but a country that has gone through this perhaps in a slightly different way, but, you know, a dictator toppled with the U.S. help in that case, but nonetheless, therefore, a vacuum emerging after that. Are there lessons from there? Do you look at Iraq and think that there are similarities with Syria here, or is there more of an opportunity, more of a hope perhaps with Syria that they can, that the rebels and the groups that are involved here can emerge in Syria in a more positive way?
There are certainly lessons to be learned from Iraq, but also from Libya and a few other countries where you did have similar long-standing dictatorships, whether it was Gaddafi in Libya or the Saddam Hussein Ba'athist regime in Iraq, toppled. Of course, as you said, in Iraq, it was slightly different because it was a US-led intervention and occupation of a country for several years, whereas here it's much more of a kind of Syrian-led initiative in terms of transition. Some things that we really need to, from now, be thinking about is how is this social contract going to be restructured? In Iraq, for example, a lot of people didn't have much say. Yes, there was elections and all of these kind of facets of democracy, but in reality, the elites who would come to govern Iraq never gave away their impunity and never put themselves under the rule of law, never gave up their guns. And the same is true in Libya and elsewhere. These are the questions that those now in Syria will need to be asking. What type of government do we have? What type of government can we build? Will it be one of institutions, one of rule of law? Will we all give up our weapons and put ourselves under these mechanisms of accountability or not? And these are very big questions, very difficult questions. It's very likely that this won't be as straightforward, and there'll be a lot of difficulties and a lot of big questions, moving forward. But this sense of rejoice right now needs to be, felt by everyone in the country. It's just a relief after so many years of brutal dictatorship.
Well, there's so much more we could discuss on this, but I think we're going to have to leave it there for now. That was Renad Mansour of Chatham House and Leila Molana, Alan Monocle's Middle East correspondent. And now here's Anita Riota with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has been banned from leaving the country after he imposed martial law last week. Yoon has not resigned, but there are reports he is being criminally investigated. China has announced its first monetary policy shift to spur growth since 2010. Beijing said it aims to vigorously boost consumption and expand domestic demand in 2025. 2024 will be the hottest year on record, according to European Union scientists. The report comes just weeks after the UN pledged $300 billion to combat climate change. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita. The war in Ukraine has become one of the hottest topics of Germany's federal elections set for February, and one of the bigger points of distinction between the two candidates, the main candidates, incumbent Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Conservative opposition leader Friedrich Merz of the Christian Democrats. Scholz, who is behind in the polls, has recently made some inroads by portraying himself as the man who will keep the peace in Europe and avoid escalation. Friedrich Merz finds himself in Kyiv today, offering support to the Ukrainian government, but also walking something of a tightrope. Well, joining me now is Aaron Burnett, Security Policy Fellow with European Resilience Initiative. Aaron, what has Friedrich Merz been up to in Kyiv so far?
Well, Chris, he's been in Kyiv to do a few things. One of the most important things is to really communicate to the Ukrainians that German support is solid with Trump coming into office, and to float the idea of a contact group for support for Ukraine within Europe that would involve Germany, with him leading Germany as chancellor, should he win the next election, which the polls indicate is an extremely likely outcome, along with other countries that really are in this coalition of the willing, Poland, the Baltics, the Nordics, that consider supporting Ukraine to really be in their security interest. And ultimately, he is also there to bring that message for his own domestic campaign back home, to say, I am the chancellor who really has European security at heart, or I'm the candidate that has European security at heart. So really a double purpose trip to Kyiv here.
Well, and Aaron, Friedrich Merz has been put somewhat on the back foot of late when it comes to things like pledging to allow Ukraine to use, to receive long-range German Taurus missiles and also use them to strike within Russia. This is something that Olaf Scholz has attacked. I just wonder if you get the sense that Merz is still as committed as he was, is still leaning into some of his rhetoric in terms of the strength that he wants to show when it comes to Ukraine.
I mean, that is a really good question. It will be interesting to see how that evolves over the course of this particular election campaign. What I can say are two things. One is Friedrich Merz does have a history of occasionally flip-flopping on policy. So we do have to consider that. At the same time, he has made, and his party have made, statements that are very difficult politically to walk back from. One was to simply say that he had that he would deliver Taurus within 24 hours if Putin would not cease his attacks. He walked that statement back slightly, but only to say that he had not issued Putin an ultimatum, not to say that he wouldn't do it if he were elected. The other position that his party has stated very clearly is that they support an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO and a credible path to NATO. And that's a statement that they issued the same day as Mark Rutte made his visit to Berlin. And they issued that statement by a tweet in English. Very, very, very clear messaging there. And I actually think that, I don't think that Friedrich Merz is actually on the back foot quite as much as some people might believe. I mean, ultimately, the German public and their support of Ukraine is really one of the biggest underreported stories of this entire election campaign and this entire war, and Germany's support within this war. We are looking at over 70% of Germans who support delivery of weapons to Ukraine. 43% of Germans say that the West should increase the number of weapons it delivers to Ukraine. 27% say it should remain around the same as it is. And we're dealing with maybe a quarter of Germans who say that there should be less military support for Ukraine than there is currently. Compare that to January 2022, when 75% of Germans said that they opposed sending any weapons to Ukraine whatsoever. So I actually think that Friedrich Merz is speaking to a lot bigger constituency among Germans than many people would generally want us to believe, including Olaf Scholz.
Well, to that point then, what have you made, Aaron, of Olaf Scholz's approach here? Because he has kind of leaned into this rhetoric of late that he is the peacemaker who will avoid escalation with Russia, and accusing Merz of being the one who would, increase escalation with Russia. Scholz was always more skeptical, perhaps, of going all the way in Ukraine support, but he is now kind of owning this line in a more confident way than he used to.
I wouldn't necessarily say that he is, maybe he's trying to own this particular line. I wouldn't say that he owns it. I would say that this is his way of trying to win back certain voters who may have voted SPD at one point, but have defected either to the far right AfD, Alternative for Germany. There is some flow of voters in that direction, according to public opinion polling that we have, but also to the Zara Wagenknecht alliance, this populist left alliance that is, very much trumpets pro-Kremlin, pro-Putin positions. And he has, one really would say, obsessed with winning back these voters that have defected. He keeps his parliamentarians in meetings that last for hours, and they are all around how they win back these particular voters. However, politically speaking, I don't really think that this makes a lot of sense, because I actually think that he's, he's actually risking losing a lot more voters to the CDU and indeed to the Greens, who advocate a stronger position on Ukraine, then he really could get back from the BSV or the AfD, and these voters may rather vote for the genuine article. I mean, ultimately, Olaf Scholz is not very much to anybody right now. The people who really do want this peace line of negotiating with Putin, will ask why he's delivering weapons, and those people who support Ukraine are going to ask why he's delivering this peace chancellor line. He really is nothing to anybody. With this line at the moment, which is why his party, even if he gets 1 or 2 points back in the polls every now and then, why it's currently languishing at a post-war low in the polls at the moment. It's not really a strategy that makes sense to me, at least politically, looking at where German public opinion now is.
Olaf Scholz reaching for whatever he can reach for. Aaron Burnett, thank you very much for joining us from Berlin. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing, and I'm Chris Chermak. It's time now for a roundup of theatre news from Broadway to the West End. And for that, I'm joined by Matt Wolf, theatre critic at the International New York Times. Matt, always great to have you on the show. It is nearing the holidays, and you have some new productions at the National Theatre for us.
Yes, the National is firing on all cylinders at the moment. I mean, they have a tradition, Chris, of sort of unveiling something pretty hefty for the holidays. But this year, they've really outdone themselves with a production of a beloved children's classic by Noel Streatfeild called Ballet Shoes. Now, I confess, not having grown up in England and not having been a girl, that this title was new to me. And the fact that it was as charming and as really buoyant as it is, I think really speaks to the quality of Kendall Fever's adaptation of Katie Rudd's direction. I mean, it's a very, very charming show about 3 adopted sisters who go to stage school, and they discover as they get older that they have different, paths in life. One of them, Pauline, is going to become an actress. Another one, Petrova, is more scientifically minded. And then Posey likes dance, hence the Ballet Shoes at the title. And it's one of those shows, Chris, in which the National pulls out all the stops. It's got a huge cast, it's got music, it's got dance, it's got an elaborate set, which brings a car into view where needed. I mean, you feel as if all the resources of the National are there on view, and it's really entirely delightful. As they say, everyone from, age 6 to 60 or 90, I think is going to have a great time.
Matt, I'm curious, when you describe a show like Ballet Shoes, I mean, how important are the holidays for theatres? How important is their lineup when it comes to this time of year?
Yeah, well, it must be very important because for any theater critic's schedule, it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, the week after next, I think I've got sort of 2 shows opening pretty much every night. So how I'm going to see them all before Christmas is anyone's guess. I think there's a real rush to get all the reviews in before Christmas, and then everyone can kind of relax a little over the holidays into January. So it's kind of all hands on deck at the moment. And the National in particular wants to get the family audience, obviously, and what better time to do so.
Absolutely. Well, we did also want to talk about not just the positive, but the negative. You have a few duds for us you wanted to talk about, particularly The Devil Wears Prada.
Yes, now that has nothing to do with the National, but this is a big West End extravaganza. People will know the title, of course. It's the acclaimed movie from 2006 with Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway, set in the world of fashion journalism in New York. Meryl Streep plays the kind of Anna Wintour-esque editor of a magazine called Runway. And the penchant now is to take every movie that anyone has half heard of and turn it into a stage musical. This is a better known movie than that. So why shouldn't it be a great musical? And actually, there's no reason why it shouldn't be, except that it isn't. A couple of summers ago, they tried it out in Chicago with a largely different creative team, and that didn't go very well. And most of the people from that iteration were let go. But the main people still on board are Elton John, who we all know, and the American creative Shana Taub, and it's Elton's score. Shana Taub has worked on the lyrics. Kate Weatheritt has done the script, and it still feels like it needs to go back to the fitter, I guess one should say. It just feels very pro forma. If ever a show looked like it was assembled by AI, this is it. Everything ticks all the boxes, but nothing really has any organic life. And you just feel as if it's going through the motions, trying to kind of resonate with an audience already primed to respond, but nothing feels genuine. I found it quite dispiriting.
Well, and Matt, speaking of Elton John, he has another show called Tammy Faye that's just closed on Broadway. He's not having a particularly good time of it right now, given that that one was also a very short run in New York. What is it about Elton John's musicals at the moment? Is it the music, the direction? What's failing there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have to say, Chris, I feel slightly guilty about Tammy Faye because when it was done here originally at the Almeida in Islington, wonderful venue that seats about 325 or something like that, I gave it a really strong review. And I said, this has a good score, which it does. It has a lot of potential. But what I didn't think was that it would get airlifted from a pretty intimate, cozy theater to a big Broadway barn seating, 1,700 people, the Palace Theater, where it just closed yesterday, with nowhere in between. And that is a huge leap for a show to take. And I think what happened, I didn't have a chance to see it in New York, but I think what happened is that it looked exposed in this large arena, a little bit like Devil Wears Prada, which, from my view, has a less good score than Tammy Faye, looks exposed at the Dominion Theater. Both of them have very strong simple performances. Katie Braben as Tammy Faye, and in this production, the Broadway star Vanessa Williams playing the Meryl Streep part of Miranda Priestley. But in the case of both, I think it doesn't feel as if there's been that much genuine commitment to the project. It feels slightly by numbers.
Matt Wolf, we'll let you get on with your busy theater schedule ahead of the holidays, but thank you very much for joining us today to unpack some of the Broadway and West End musicals. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, we head to northern Norway, where a new school designed by the celebrated Norwegian architecture studio Snøhetta helps the region's indigenous population learn about their culture and history. We dispatched our Helsinki correspondent, Petri Bertsoff, to hear from the school's principal, as well as some of its pupils, about the importance of the new school and how it has affected the local Sámi population.
Perched on top of a hill in the Norwegian city of Kautokeino, some 300 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, Koervematta, as it's called in the local Sámi language, houses a Sámi high school, a reindeer herding school, as well as the Sámi National Theatre, Beavaish. The building, which is designed by the famed Norwegian architecture studio Snøhetta, is a sight to behold, to say the least. Drawing inspiration from the architecture as well as the way of life of the Sámi, Europe's last remaining indigenous people, the two-story wooden building features an undulating roof that reaches all the way down to the ground and a silhouette that follows the natural shapes of the terrain where it stands, with its sloping fells and wide, expansive Arctic landscapes. There are some 40,000 Sámi living in Norway, and Kautokeino is their cultural and educational hub. The school plays an important role in upholding the Sámi way of life. In addition to the standard subjects that form the core of Norway's national curriculum, the school has been tasked with teaching its pupils about the Sámi history and culture, including elements such as traditional handicrafts and reindeer herding.
I am Anna Solveig Sara, and I'm the principal at the school. Geography, social studies, history, it has elements from the Sámi, from how we were living in old times, how we can see how the Sámis have been living, like history, but also in geographic they see the Sámi, how the Sámi regions are, how they have been like they are. The Sámi handicraft, or duetji as it is called in Sámi, it's the only school with that in whole Norway. We don't have many high schools like this that has that kind of study. And also reindeer husbandry, that is only for our school. So all pupils from all young people from whole Norway can actually seek them to be here.
Moving to such a landmark building has been a significant boost for the school, both in terms of improving the learning environment as well as instilling a sense of pride in the community, as Principal Sara explains.
I think it's quite different from the old school that we had, because this here is more open. It gives them more possibilities to use the rooms in another way than they are used to. So they are not sitting like from starting of lesson to the end of lesson in the same room. Of course, it is very important that we got a new school here, because already this year we see that we have more pupils who wanted to go to school here. We had really problems to find place to everything in the classes. So it's important also that the pupils or young people who live here in Kautokeino have the chance to take their education, first education here in their local home place, instead of traveling 250 kilometers from here to go to high school. So it's very good.
One of those young people is Anna-Risten Bongo. Monocle meets her in between classes in the school's large open vestibule that is modeled after a traditional Sámi tent.
I'm from this village. I do also, I've always grown up with the reindeer herding and stuff, so to have a school that represents that and that shows the Sámi culture is really unique to me. It's really close to home, so. And I think it's also really attractive. This school makes it more attractive to move in here also to people that aren't from the village.
Bonga tells us that the school, where the students are all Sámi and speak the Sámi language with each other, plays an important role in sustaining and cultivating the Sámi culture and way of life for today's Sámi youth.
It's really, really important, as we have come to this time in society where we are kind of losing it all. It's difficult to find things online and stuff. You have to dig deep to find, and you have to be a part of it to understand it. So it's really important also for not only the culture part but also the language part, I think, because we are starting to lose our language a little bit, as many others as well. So I think it's important for the youth to not only save it but to maintain it as well, because we do want to continue with our culture and our language and reindeer herding and stuff. So I think it's really important that we get opportunities like this to move into such a huge school with the main goal is to focus on culture and language and our traditions as well. So I think it's good for maintaining our culture and language.
For Monocle in Kautokeino, Norway, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Thank you very much, Petri, in Norway. For more on the political inclusion of indigenous populations, you can tune into the latest episode of The Foreign Desk as well. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing, though. It was produced by Anita Riota, our researcher was Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.